What was found inside this unassuming storage unit is still hard to explain. It seemed like any ordinary garage box. Even the man who inherited it was confused as to why this was his father's final present to him. His siblings joked about it constantly, but their laughter faded when he opened the garage for the first time. This is what he found, in his own words. Man gets mocked for his inheritance, then he finds this. As I stood there in the notary's office, the laughter from my siblings filled the room. They were counting their share of the inheritance, $50,000 each, while I held a single, worn key in my hand. My father had passed away a little over a month ago, which left a gaping hole in my life. I was hoping that the inheritance would provide some comfort. I wasn't hoping for tons of money, unlike my siblings beside me. I just wanted to know that, when he chose what to leave me, if he had thought about his love for me. And it turned out that what my father decided to leave me was an old storage until, one which I never heard of before. To them, it was a joke worth laughing over. To me, though, it felt like something more. It was an interesting look into my father's life, something that needed exploring. My brother, Michael, gave me a pitying smile, shaking his head. Dad must have loved us more, huh, Arthur, he said, followed by a chuckle. The others joined in, sharing glances that communicated a strange blend of pity and superiority. But I didn't feel slighted. I trusted my father's reasons, however mysterious. As we left the notary's office, my siblings continued with their teasing. I hope you like sifting through Dad's old junk, my sister, Clara, smirked. It was all they could talk about as we drove to the storage facility. But I let their comments wash over me. Whatever lay within that storage unit, I believed it held something more than the others could understand. The storage facility was in an isolated part of town, the kind of place people use to stash things they do not longer need, but are hard to part with. Usually these things were worthless. At least that was what shows like Storage Wars taught me. But perhaps today was going to be different. The paint on the building was chipped, and the units looked old. But for some reason, I didn't feel discouraged. I felt almost a strange anticipation, as though my father had left me a puzzle to solve, a path to walk on my own. With my siblings trailing behind, snickering, I stepped up to the metal door of Unit 13. The key was cold in my hand as I inserted it into the rusty lock. The door creaked and groaned as I pulled it up, dust and stale air rushing out to greet us. My siblings wrinkled their noses, muttering something about this locker being a waste of their time. Some were even questioning why they tagged along in the first place. It wasn't like I asked them to come with me or anything. They just wanted to mock me some more, I guess. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The unit was packed, wall to wall, with old furniture, boxes, and the smell of age. There was an ancient television set with dials instead of buttons, a floral-patterned armchair, and a side table with detailed carvings. It all looked like it belonged to another time, maybe the life my father had lived before we ever knew him. Michael was the first to laugh, pointing at the television. "What is this, 1960? Dad left you a museum," he sneered, and the others laughed along. I couldn't help but smile, though. Every piece here had a story, I could feel it. I wasn't sure what, but something urged me to look closer to understand why this storage unit mattered to my father. Clara poked at a lamp with a fringed shade, shaking her head. "It's all junk, Arthur. You could toss it all and no one would miss it." But I didn't listen to them. I ran my fingers over the carved table. It wasn't just any old table. It was intricate, beautifully crafted, a piece of art. It seemed odd that my father would stash it all here, hidden from us. But as we started pulling items out, they noticed it, too. The furniture, although worn, was far from worthless. There was quality and history here. We lifted out an ornate chest, its sides detailed with hand-carved patterns of birds and leaves. Even Clara's eyes widened a little. "Why did he keep this here?" she muttered, running her hand over the carvings. I didn't have an answer, but I felt a strange sense of pride. Maybe my father had left me more than they could see, a reminder of his legacy, even though he was just a simple carpenter who mostly worked on construction sites. But little did Arthur and his siblings know that their father had a huge secret he kept from them during his lifetime. Underneath the chest was a stack of boxes labeled in my father's handwriting. They were cryptic labels, things like memories, beginnings, and Arthur's. My siblings snorted when they saw that last one. "A box just for you, huh?" "Probably filled with old socks," Michael joked, but I felt a tremor of excitement. I knew that my father had left this for me to find. We took out an old record player, together with stacks of vinyl that rest on top of the cases next. It was dusty but in good condition. The records were still in their sleeves and included some true classics. My siblings' mockery grew quieter as they realized the depth of what lay here. It wasn't trash. It was my father's past, each item a piece of his story. By the time we reached the back of the unit, the pile of furniture and boxes outside was impressive. An antique mirror with a gilded frame, a grandfather clock that had stopped ticking long ago, and a bookshelf filled with worn leather-bound books. All these things had value, both in their craftsmanship and in the memories they held. But they were all a warm-up of what was to come. I insisted that we open the case with my name on it last, since it felt the most important. But I did not realize that all the items we had just carried outside were connected to that one case everyone was desperately waiting for me to open. When my siblings and I were drenched in sweat, and the unit was empty, it was finally time. The case was opened, and before I could even reach inside, Clara had already beaten me to it. Clara picked up a stack of black and white photos. They showed scenes of people I didn't recognize, family gatherings and holidays from before our time. Clara looked at me, her expression softening. "Did Dad ever mention these?" she asked quietly. I shook my head. Inside the case that said past was also an old portrait of a young man who looked oddly familiar. My siblings exchanged glances. It looked like our father in his youth. He was dressed in posh clothing and looked sad, as if he didn't want to be there. The people around him were his brothers and sisters. Clara recognized our aunt's younger face immediately. It was strange seeing my father in his younger years. We were a working-class family with just enough money to go around. That's why my father always pushed us to work hard and be grateful for the small things in life. I always obeyed those life lessons, but my brother and sister never did. Michael had already spent his $50K buying a sports car, which was typical. But looking at these pictures, it seemed my dad wasn't always truthful. There was a life he led before teaching us our sober lifestyle, a life that seemed much grander. I fiddled around in the chest with my name on it and found an envelope, which held a letter. It was addressed to me, so I read it. But this time, I took some distance from my siblings to read privately. In the letter, my dad spoke to me personally, stating that he was so proud of the man I had become. He loved all of us, but admitted that my brother and sister had grown up to be much more selfish. That's why he gave them a simple request that suited their personalities: flat cash. But my inheritance had to mean something. It had to be about more than spending. The letter ended with an address I had never seen before and a request from my father to go there. After reading this request, I said nothing to my siblings, and after loading up all the items in my truck, I locked the storage unit and quietly drove away to the unknown address. Little did I know that my siblings were cunning enough to follow me from a distance. Their laughter and mockery had slowly turned into intrigue and even a bit of jealousy. The craftsmanship of the furniture, combined with the wealthy appearance of our younger father, made them feel that there was something more to get out of my inheritance, more than our father initially let on. So, as I drove, they tailed my car, a fact that I took notice of about 10 miles in. I drove carefully, casting occasional glances in my rearview mirror, fully aware of the headlights trailing me in the distance. My heart pounded with a blend of curiosity and anxiety as I approached the address from my father's letter. And that's when a huge mansion suddenly came into view. The place was massive. Why did Dad send me to this place? I parked, took a deep breath, and walked up to the grand door, uncertain of what I'd find inside. The door was locked, and every window was shut tightly. The only thing I received from my father was the key that was meant for the storage unit. So, seeing no other option, I gave that a go. And to my surprise, it fit perfectly. The door swung open, and I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing on the polished marble floors. I wandered through the hall, the crystal chandeliers casting faint glimmers of light. Every room screamed luxury. But to me, everything felt like a mystery. And apparently, it had to do with my dad. I took my time exploring, moving from room to room, marveling at the elegance. Plush, velvet-upholstered chairs filled a formal sitting room arranged around a walnut table. There was a library brimming with ancient books organized with care on dark wooden shelves. There was something surreal about it all. I touched the carved moldings, letting my fingers trace the patterns. This place was so unlike anything we grew up with. I continued my quiet journey through the mansion, captivated by every carefully crafted detail. Finally, I entered the main living room and froze. Above the grand fireplace hung an enormous portrait. On it was a family dressed in fine clothes. And right in the middle stood my father, much younger and somber, dressed in a way that didn't match the man I knew. "What is going on, Dad?" I whispered, looking up at the painting in disbelief. Suddenly, a door slammed behind me, and I spun around to see my siblings standing in the doorway, looking equally shocked. Clara's face was a mix of confusion and intrigue, while Michael's disbelief quickly shifted to irritation. "What is this, Arthur?" he demanded to know, their earlier mockery now replaced by commands. They stepped inside, just as bewildered as I was. I pointed to the portrait above the fireplace, and their gazes followed mine. Clara's face softened with recognition. "That's Dad," she whispered, her voice wavering. We all stared at the painting, struggling to reconcile this wealthy, well-dressed version of our father with the modest man who had raised us. After pondering for a while, we walked into the mansion's dining room together. As Michael entered the dining room, he instantly saw an envelope lying on the table. Without hesitation, he raced past me and picked it up, tearing it open. The familiar handwriting made my heart race. He read the letter aloud, revealing truths we had never imagined. Our father had been born into immense wealth, yet he deliberately left that life behind. The letter described that Dad's family was rooted in privilege, a life filled with everything they wanted. But also with parents who looked down on others who had less. They called working-class people peasants and took no shame in bashing people who had less than them. Disgusted by his family's elitism, Dad had chosen to walk away and live simply and purposefully. He wanted us to know the value of hard work and humility. I felt both pride and sorrow hearing his words. Our father had chosen a different path, prioritizing authenticity over wealth. Dad walked away from luxury to show us what really mattered. It was strange, but comforting to see that he had sacrificed so much, shaping us into people grounded in his values. Michael shook his head, anger simmering in his eyes. "So, he had all of this? And he just left it? We could have been rich," he muttered, sounding pretty resentful. But I only felt a growing respect for my father's decision. He'd known that this kind of life wasn't worth pursuing, so instead, he chose a path that emphasized humility, something Michael couldn't seem to grasp. That's when we all noticed the following. We saw that many of the furniture pieces in here matched those inside the storage unit. One chair was missing at the dining table, its twin was on my truck's bed. The outline of a cabinet on the wall also matched the form of one inside the unit. Dad hadn't just left things behind, he'd set out breadcrumbs for me to find this house. Claire snatched the letter from her brother and continued to read out loud. "He kept the house," Clara murmured, trailing her fingers over the paper. "But he wanted it to go to the one who understood." I felt proud, knowing my father had entrusted me with his hidden legacy. My siblings had laughed at my inheritance, but now they saw its true value. When my sister finished reading, I could only nod. I understood Dad's message clearly. The storage unit, the furniture, it was all part of a larger plan to teach us what truly mattered. My siblings looked at me, jealousy flashing in their eyes, but I felt a sense of gratitude. This was more than wealth, it was a lesson Dad had left behind for me alone to understand. Michael's expression darkened as he turned to me. "So, what are you going to do with all of this, Arthur?" he asked, his tone laced with frustration. Clara watched our interaction, clearly also curious about what I was about to say. Their inheritance was flat cash, while mine carried depth and meaning and much more wealth given the current housing market. "I need to think about it," I replied, choosing my words carefully. The mansion, the heirlooms, but mostly the life lessons Dad had instilled in me all needed to be considered. I knew I couldn't make a hasty decision. This inheritance was more than just a house, it was a responsibility. I wanted to honor Dad's memory in the way he would have wanted. In the following weeks, I wrestled with what to do. This mansion, a symbol of Dad's hidden history, represented a choice between the life he'd rejected and the values he had embraced. Finally, I made my decision. I knew it wouldn't please everyone, but it felt right, something Dad would have approved of. I contacted a realtor and put the mansion up for sale. But this decision was not made because I wanted to get the money and become rich. I didn't want to keep the wealth or the grandeur. Instead, I wanted to transform it into something meaningful. This inheritance, rooted in a past my father had rejected, would be used to make a difference in people's lives, a lasting tribute to his values. With the proceeds from the mansion's sale, I began donating to homeless shelters and foster programs around town. The wealth Dad had left behind would now serve those who needed it most, helping children find fair chances in life. I felt a deep sense of pride, knowing I was carrying forward my father's principles in a way that honored him. The impact of the donations grew, and so did my connection to the community. I visited shelters, offered support, and saw Dad's values in every act of compassion. My siblings watched from a distance, surprised and, at times, regretful. Michael couldn't quite understand it, but Clara seemed to see the wisdom in Dad's choices and occasionally volunteered. I was happy with her change. Dad would have been proud. The community recognized my efforts, and soon, Dad's story became an example of humility and generosity. People admired the man who had left behind wealth and the teachings of great values. These acts of kindness transformed an inheritance into a lasting legacy. Every donation felt like a continuation of Dad's story, a message he'd crafted for everyone to believe in. The mansion, now in the hands of a new family, remained a symbol of the life Dad had chosen to leave behind. Occasionally, I visited the place, with the permission of the family who now owned it, of course. They were kind people who made the large halls inside the building feel warm and cozy again. They also donated a lot to the cause, making Dad's movement even more powerful. Years passed, and as I watched the impact of the donations, I felt Dad's presence, a quiet reassurance beside me. He'd left me something invaluable, a guide to living a meaningful life. I knew he was proud of how I'd chosen to honor him, his legacy now woven into the fabric of our community. Michael even came to understand my decision, though jealousy always lingered a bit. As I grew older, the lessons Dad left me deepened in meaning. The community grew stronger, bolstered by programs we'd funded together. I felt his presence in every kind word exchanged, every life uplifted. The mansion, a symbol of a past left behind, now stood as a quiet testament to our family's shared values. Dad's legacy was woven into every story it touched. Clara became a close ally in this journey, helping me organize new projects and outreach programs. Her initial doubts faded, replaced by a profound respect for Dad's vision. We often spoke about him, remembering the laughter and the lessons. She understood now that his gift was never about money, it was a beacon, guiding us toward a purpose beyond ourselves. In the end, Dad's inheritance transformed us all. The life he had walked away from found new meaning, reshaped through compassion and shared purpose. The mansion no longer held secrets, only memories and values that we carried forward. Every day, I felt grateful for the path he'd shown me, and in that gratitude, I found a profound peace that would last a lifetime.